The stars burned cold in the void as Captain Jake Morrison stared at his ship's display screen. The numbers made no sense. Harmony Prime should have been sending out radio signals, ship traffic, the usual noise of a busy colony world. Instead, his sensors showed nothing but silence. "Lisa, run that scan again," Jake said to his tactical officer. Lisa Grant checked her instruments twice before shaking her head. "Still nothing, Captain. No communications, no energy signatures, no life signs. It's like the whole planet just went dead." Jake felt his stomach twist. Harmony Prime housed 3 million Zilani colonists, peaceful beings who had never hurt anyone. Their crystal cities were supposed to be among the most beautiful sights in this part of the galaxy. Danny Parker, the ship's engineer, looked up from his console with worry in his eyes. "Sir, I'm picking up some kind of energy residue in the planet's atmosphere. It's unlike anything in our database." The Terran Wanderer dropped out of hyperspace near Harmony Prime's orbit. What Jake saw through the view screen made his blood run cold. The planet's surface glowed with an eerie purple light. Where crystal cities once stood, only glass craters remained. The oceans had turned black and the atmosphere flickered with strange electrical storms. "My God," Lisa whispered. "What could do this to an entire world?" Jake had heard the stories. Everyone in this part of space had. The Deathworld Alliance was expanding again, led by species so violent and hardy that they made their homes on planets that would kill most other life forms in minutes. The Vorthek came from Pyraxis, a world of constant volcanic eruptions and seas of liquid metal. The Skrell lived on Koros, where acid rain fell every day, and the very air could melt flesh from bone. These species looked at the rest of the galaxy and saw weakness. They had conquered world after world, showing no mercy to anyone they considered soft. To them, only the strong deserved to survive, and strength was measured by how much pain and death you could endure. "Captain," Danny called out, his voice tight with fear, "I'm detecting a massive energy signature moving through this system." "It's big, sir. Really big." Jake's hands moved quickly over his controls, bringing up the sensor data. What he saw made his heart pound. A ship unlike anything in the Alliance databases was moving between the inner planets. It was enormous, at least 20 kilometers long, and it seemed to bend space around itself. Reality itself looked twisted near the vessel. "That's impossible," Lisa said, studying the readings. "The energy output is off the charts. It's like they're using the fabric of space as a weapon." "The Void Render," Jake whispered, remembering intelligence reports he had hoped were just rumors. They actually built it. The ship was a nightmare made real. Alliance intelligence had spoken of a weapon that could destroy matter at the quantum level, turning planets into energy that fed back into the weapon itself. Each world it destroyed made it stronger. Jake watched in horror as the massive vessel fired a beam of pure darkness at one of Harmony Prime's moons. The moon didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, a ball of rock and ice. The next moment there was only empty space and a pulse of energy that flowed back into the alien ship. "We need to leave," Jake said, his training fighting against his desire to help any survivors. "Right now." But as the Terran Wanderer prepared to jump to hyperspace, Jake's communications officer picked up something that made his blood freeze. It was a transmission from Admiral Crix Vorthak himself, the crystal being who commanded the Alliance fleet. The Admiral's voice sounded like grinding stone mixed with the roar of a furnace. "Attention all soft-worlders in this system. You have witnessed the power of the Void Render. Your weakness disgusts us. Soon we will cleanse the galaxy of all inferior species, starting with the pathetic humans of Earth." Jake felt anger rise in his chest. Earth was his home with its blue oceans and green forests. It was where his sister raised her children, where his parents had taught him to look at the stars and dream of exploration. The Deathworlders saw it as a garden world, too soft and peaceful to produce real warriors. They were wrong about that. But Jake hoped they would never find out just how wrong. "The human colonies will fall first," Admiral Crix continued. "Your species amuses us. You come from a world so gentle that you never learned real strength. You will provide entertainment as you beg for mercy we will not give." The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge of the Terran Wanderer in silence. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same determination in their eyes that he felt in his heart. They were just a small scout ship with basic weapons and shields. Against the Void Render, they would last about as long as a candle in a hurricane. But they were human, and humans had never been good at accepting defeat. "Plot a course for Earth," Jake ordered. "Maximum speed." "Sir," Lisa said carefully, Even if we push the engines past their limits, it will take us 6 days to reach Earth. That thing could destroy a dozen worlds in that time. Jake nodded grimly. Then we better make sure our warning gets there first. As the Terran Wanderer jumped to hyperspace, Jake thought about what he had seen. The Deathworld Alliance had spent centuries conquering through pure violence and superior technology. They measured strength by how much suffering a species could endure and still fight. They came from worlds where every day was a battle just to survive. But they had never faced humans before, not really. They saw Earth's blue skies and gentle weather and assumed humanity was weak. They looked at human cities with their parks and art museums and thought they saw a species that had never known hardship. Jake smiled grimly as the stars streaked past his view screen. The Deathworlders were about to learn something that every human child knew. The strongest steel was forged in the hottest fire, but the sharpest blade was made by someone who understood exactly what they were fighting to protect. Earth might be a garden world, but gardens were tended by people who understood that sometimes you had to fight to keep beautiful things alive. Admiral Helen Brooks stood at the center of Earth's military command, watching as red warning lights flashed across every screen in the room. Jake Morrison's message had arrived just hours ago, but already the reports were flooding in from across human space. The Centauri defense platform, humanity's strongest military installation, had gone silent. 3 colonial worlds had stopped responding to communications. "Tell me you have something, Alex," Helen said to the man hunched over a computer terminal in the corner of the room. Dr. Alex Coleman looked up from his analysis, his face pale. "It's worse than we thought, Admiral. The energy signatures Jake recorded match theoretical models for quantum matter conversion. This void render doesn't just destroy things. It eats them and uses them to make itself stronger." Helen felt her heart sink. She had commanded Earth's defense forces for 20 years, had fought pirates and hostile aliens, had even survived the Martian rebellion. But this was different. This was a weapon that got more powerful with every victory. "How powerful?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Alex pulled up a holographic display that showed the void render's estimated capabilities. Based on the energy readings, if it destroyed Earth's moon, it would have enough power to vaporize every ship in our fleet simultaneously. And if it somehow managed to consume our sun, he paused, unable to finish the sentence. It would have enough energy to sterilize this entire arm of the galaxy, Helen finished for him. The door to the command center burst open as Colonel Rick Hansen strode in, still wearing his flight suit from a training exercise. Rick was humanity's best pilot, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life. But even he looked shaken by what he had heard. "Admiral, I've been listening to the briefings. Tell me we have a plan." Helen looked around the room at her officers and advisors. These were good people, smart people, but they all had the same expression she knew was on her own face. They were facing something that conventional military thinking couldn't handle. "The plan is simple, Rick. We're going to hit that thing with everything we have and hope it's enough." "And if it's not enough?" Helen was quiet for a moment. Through the command center's windows, she could see Earth turning slowly below them. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents where billions of people lived their lives in peace. Children playing in parks, artists creating beautiful things, scientists working to make the universe a better place. Then we make sure that when humanity falls, we fall fighting. Dr. Alex Coleman suddenly straightened up at his computer. "Wait, I might have something." The quantum signatures from the void render show an interesting pattern. The ship exists partially outside normal spacetime. That's how it can ignore our weapons and convert matter so efficiently. "Can we use that against it?" Helen asked. "Maybe. If we could destabilize its quantum anchor, force it fully back into normal space, it might become vulnerable to conventional weapons." Rick leaned forward, interested. "What would that take?" Alex hesitated. "Someone would have to get inside the ship and manually disrupt the quantum field generators. And they would have to do it while the ship was actively using its matter conversion weapons, because that's when the fields are most unstable." The room fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. It was a suicide mission. "I'll do it," Rick said without hesitation. Helen shook her head. "Rick, you'd never make it through their defenses. That ship has weapons we can't even understand. Then we don't use conventional approach tactics. We use stealth." Alex looked up from his calculations. "The experimental cloaking device on the Silent Thunder might work. The ship uses gravitic distortion to bend light and sensor beams around itself, but it's never been tested against Deathworld or technology. Helen considered the options. The Silent Thunder was humanity's most advanced stealth ship, built using technology that pushed the limits of human engineering. But against the Void Render, it would be like sending a rowboat against a battleship. What else would you need? She asked Rick, a demolitions expert and someone who understands quantum physics. Maria Santos is the best explosives person we have. And Dr. Peter Kim has been working on exotic matter research for years. Helen looked around the room one more time. Outside the windows, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, unaware that its fate was being decided by a small group of people in a military station high above the atmosphere. You understand this is probably a one-way trip, she said to Rick. I understand that if we don't try, it's definitely a one-way trip for everyone on Earth. Within 6 hours, the Silent Thunder was being prepared for launch. Maria Santos checked and rechecked her experimental explosives while Dr. Peter Kim loaded quantum analysis equipment into the ship's small cargo hold. Rick ran through the flight systems, familiarizing himself with controls that had been designed by the smartest engineers humanity had ever produced. Meanwhile, Jake Morrison's ship continued to send updates from the outer colonies. The Void Render was moving steadily toward Earth, destroying everything in its path. Each attack was more devastating than the last, as if the weapon was learning how to be more efficient at converting matter into energy. It's testing itself, Alex realized as he studied the latest reports. Each attack teaches it something new about how to maximize energy absorption. By the time it reaches Earth, it will be operating at peak efficiency. Helen watched the Silent Thunder's final preparations through the command center's cameras. The ship looked small and fragile, compared to the massive battleships of humanity's main fleet. But sometimes the smallest keys opened the biggest locks. Admiral, Rick's voice came through the communication system. We're ready for launch. Helen took a deep breath. Rick, I want you to know that whatever happens out there, Earth will remember what you're doing today. Just make sure Earth is still here to remember it. Admiral. The Silent Thunder launched from its hidden bay on the dark side of Earth's moon, its experimental engines barely registering on sensors. As it disappeared into the star field, Helen found herself thinking about the Deathworld Alliance and their belief that only the strongest deserved to survive. They measured strength by how much pain a species could endure, how well they could fight and kill and destroy. But they had never encountered humanity's kind of strength. The willingness to sacrifice everything for people you would never meet. To face impossible odds not because you enjoyed fighting, but because some things were worth dying to protect. The Deathworlders were about to learn that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was choose hope over fear, even when hope seemed impossible. The Silent Thunder moved through space like a ghost, its experimental cloaking field bending light and gravity around the small ship. Colonel Rick Hansen kept his eyes on the sensor displays as they approached Jupiter's massive form. Somewhere in this system, Deathworlder patrol ships were hunting for any sign of human activity. Contact, Dr. Peter Kim whispered from his science station. 3 ships moving in formation near Europa. Rick looked at the tactical display. The Deathworlder vessels were unlike anything in human databases. Their hulls seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and energy readings showed they were powered by something that made human fusion reactors look like candles. Maria, can you reroute power from the life support backups to the cloak generators? Rick asked quietly. Maria Santos worked quickly at her engineering console. Done, but we'll only have 30 minutes of backup air if something goes wrong. The patrol ships passed within 1,000 kilometers of the Silent Thunder, their exotic sensors sweeping through space. Rick held his breath as the alien vessels seemed to hesitate, their scanning beams lingering in the area where his ship hid. For a moment he was sure they had been detected. Then the patrol moved on, heading toward the outer planets. That was too close, Peter said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Their sensors almost penetrated our cloak. The quantum signatures are unlike anything we've studied. Rick nodded grimly. If the patrol ships had better sensors than expected, what would the Void Render be capable of detecting? They found out 6 hours later when they reached Saturn's orbit. The sight that greeted them was beyond anything Rick's military training had prepared him for. The Void Render hung in space near Saturn's rings, and it was impossible to look at directly. The ship seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, its hull shifting between solid matter and pure energy. It's beautiful, Peter whispered in horror, and absolutely impossible. The weapon was enormous, stretching for dozens of kilometers in every direction. But size wasn't what made it terrifying. Reality itself seemed broken around the ship. Stars visible through its energy field appeared in the wrong positions. Saturn's rings bent and twisted near the vessel, following paths that ignored basic physics. It's not just a ship, Rick realized. It's something alive merged with technology. Peter's instruments were going crazy, registering energy readings that shouldn't exist. The quantum distortion field is incredible. This thing exists partially outside our universe. That's why normal weapons can't touch it. Maria studied the ship's structure through her targeting systems. Look at the hull patterns. Those aren't metal plates. They're organic, like skin or scales, but made of some kind of crystalline material. As they watched, the void render extended what looked like a feeding tentacle toward one of Saturn's smaller moons. The tentacle touched the moon's surface, and the entire celestial body began to glow with the same purple light they had seen at Harmony Prime. Within minutes, the moon dissolved into pure energy that flowed back into the ship's core. The void render grew visibly larger. It's feeding, Rick said, his voice tight with disgust. That thing is alive and it's eating everything it touches. Peter's analysis confirmed their worst fears. The quantum anchor that keeps it phased out of normal space is located in the ship's central core. But Rick, the energy readings around that area are lethal to organic life. The radiation alone would kill us in seconds. Not if we're fast enough, Maria said, studying her explosive charges. I can modify these antimatter devices to disrupt quantum fields instead of just creating explosions. But I'd need to place them directly against the anchor mechanism. Rick looked at his crew. Peter Kim was a brilliant scientist who had volunteered for this mission, knowing he would probably die. Maria Santos was the best demolitions expert in human space, a woman who had never failed to complete a mission. They were both looking at him with the same expression. Determination mixed with fear, but determination winning. The plan changes, Rick decided. We're not trying to destroy this thing from the outside. We're going inside. The Silent Thunder's scanners detected docking bays along the void render's hull, openings that seemed designed for smaller ships. But as they approached, Rick realized these weren't normal docking facilities. They were feeding mouths, designed to consume visiting vessels and add their matter to the ship's growing mass. The cloak won't work inside that thing, Peter warned. The moment we enter the ship, we'll be exposed to its internal sensors. Then we better be fast, Rick replied, guiding the Silent Thunder toward the nearest docking mouth. The approach was nightmare fuel. As they entered the ship's docking system, the walls around them pulsed with veins of dark energy. The architecture was impossible. Corridors that led in directions that didn't exist. Chambers where gravity pointed in multiple directions at once. Passages that seemed to fold space back on itself. The ship's interior exists in folded space-time, Peter said, his voice filled with wonder and terror. It's bigger inside than outside, possibly infinitely bigger. They left the Silent Thunder in what appeared to be a holding bay, though the walls kept shifting between solid metal and translucent energy. Rick led the way through corridors that hurt to look at directly, following Peter's quantum compass toward the ship's central core. The first Deathworlder they encountered was a Vorthak warrior, its crystalline body crackling with electrical energy. The being was over 3 meters tall, with arms that could crush steel and eyes that burned like stars. It looked at the 3 humans with something like amusement. "Soft worlders," it said in a voice like breaking glass. "You have come to feed the ship with your flesh." Rick raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the Vorthak warrior simply dissolved into energy and reformed behind them. "Your weapons cannot touch us here, little mammals. This ship exists beyond your understanding of reality." But as the creature reached for Maria with one massive crystal hand, something unexpected happened. The ship's walls flickered, and for just a moment, the impossible architecture became normal metal corridors. The Vorthak warrior stumbled, suddenly solid and vulnerable. Rick didn't waste the opportunity. His weapon's energy blast caught the creature center mass, shattering its crystalline form into fragments. "What just happened?" Maria asked, staring at the debris. Peter checked his instruments, his eyes widening. The ship's quantum field fluctuated when the Vorthak died, like something interfered with its exotic matter systems. They continued deeper into the ship, encountering more Deathworlder crew members. Skrell warriors with acid-proof shells and claws that could cut through battle armor. Vorthak technicians whose bodies existed half in normal space and half in some other dimension. But each time they fought, each time they felt the human emotions of fear and anger and determination, the ship's reality warping systems flickered. The impossible became possible, if only for moments. It's us, Peter realized as they reached the central core chamber. Human emotions are interfering with the ship's quantum systems. We process fear and stress differently than other species. The core chamber was a vast space filled with machinery that defied description. At its center hung a massive organic brain, suspended in a web of exotic energy. The brain pulsed with dark power. But Rick could see something else in its patterns. Pain, endless pain that had been going on for centuries. That's the quantum anchor, Peter confirmed. But it's not just a machine. It's a living consciousness being tortured to maintain the ship's phase variance. Maria looked at her modified explosives. If I place these charges around the brain, I can sever its connections to the ship's systems. But the quantum feedback will probably kill us all. Rick nodded. They had known from the beginning this was a one-way mission. But looking at the tortured consciousness that powered the Void Render, he realized they weren't just trying to save Earth. They were trying to free something that had been suffering beyond imagination. Do it, he said. Maria Santos moved carefully around the massive organic brain that served as the Void Render's quantum anchor. Her modified antimatter charges felt heavy in her hands, each one capable of disrupting exotic matter fields across several kilometers. But as she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was doing something more than just sabotage. The brain pulsed with waves of pain that she could feel in her bones. Whatever this consciousness had once been, it had suffered for a very long time. Peter, are you getting these readings? She asked quietly into her communicator. Dr. Peter Kim was monitoring the brain's quantum signatures from his position near the chamber entrance. It's incredible, Maria. This isn't just powering the ship's phase variance. It's been forced to experience every moment of pain and terror that the Void Render has caused. Every world destroyed, every life ended, it feels all of it. Rick Hansen kept watch at the chamber's main door, his weapon ready for the Deathworlder forces that would inevitably find them. But the ship's corridors had gone strangely quiet. The reality distortions were getting worse, flickering between normal space and impossible geometries with increasing frequency. Something's wrong, Rick muttered. It's too quiet. They should have found us by now. His answer came in the form of Admiral Crix Vorthak himself, the crystal being materialized in the chamber like a living star, his body crackling with energy that made the air itself burn. He was beautiful and terrible, a creature of pure volcanic fury shaped into intelligence. Humans, Crix said, his voice echoing strangely in the folded space. You continue to surprise us. Most soft-worlders die of terror the moment they see the ship's interior. Yet you walk our halls and fight our warriors as if you belong here. Rick kept his weapon trained on the Admiral, though he knew it would be useless. We're here to stop you from destroying Earth. Crix laughed, a sound like continents breaking apart. Stop us, little mammal, you cannot even comprehend what you face. This ship has consumed the matter of 1,000 worlds. It has grown beyond the need for normal space-time. Soon it will devour your sun and use that energy to remake this entire galaxy. But as Crix spoke, Rick noticed something strange. The Admiral's crystalline form was flickering slightly, just like the ship's walls, and there was something in his burning eyes that looked almost like uncertainty. You're afraid, Rick realized. You don't understand what's happening to your ship. Peter's instruments were showing readings that shouldn't exist. The brain's pain patterns were changing, becoming more complex, and each time the humans felt strong emotions, the ship's exotic matter system showed interference spikes. Admiral, Peter called out, his voice steady despite the fear Rick could see in his eyes. Your ship's quantum anchor is destabilizing because of our presence. Human emotional patterns create resonance frequencies that interfere with exotic matter manipulation. Crix turned his burning gaze on the scientist. Impossible. Emotions are weakness. They cannot affect the fundamental forces of reality, can't they? Maria asked from her position near the brain. She had finished placing her charges but hadn't activated them yet. Your entire philosophy is based on the idea that suffering makes you strong. But what if you're wrong? What if the ability to feel pain and keep fighting anyway is what real strength looks like? The ship shuddered around them, and for a moment the brain's agonized pulsing seemed to slow. Crix looked around in confusion as the chamber's impossible architecture became briefly, almost normally, possible. The consciousness powering your ship has been in agony for centuries, Rick said, understanding beginning to dawn. But human emotions are teaching it something new. We don't just endure pain, we feel hope in spite of it. Crix raised one crystal arm, energy building around his form like a miniature sun. Enough philosophy, soft-worlder. You die now. But as the Admiral prepared to attack, something unprecedented happened. The brain at the chamber's center sent out a pulse of energy that wasn't dark and hungry like before. It was warm, almost gentle, and it washed over the humans like a grateful sigh. The ship's quantum fields fluctuated wildly. Corridors throughout the void render suddenly followed normal physics. Deathworlder crew members who depended on exotic matter enhancement to survive began gasping as their enhanced biology failed in normal space. "What have you done?" Crix demanded, his voice losing its confident resonance. "We gave it hope," Maria said simply, and activated her charges. The explosion wasn't violent in the way Rick expected. Instead of destroying the brain, the antimatter charges severed the neural connections that had kept it in constant agony. For the first time in centuries, the consciousness that powered the void render experienced something other than pain. Gratitude flooded through the ship's systems like warm sunlight. The brain's quantum calculations shifted from maintaining reality distortions to something else entirely. Throughout the ship, Deathworlder crew members collapsed as their exotic enhancements failed. The impossible architecture became possible. The feeding tentacles that had consumed worlds retracted into the ship's hull. Admiral Crix Vorthak staggered as his crystalline form lost its energy enhancement. Without the ship's exotic fields to sustain him, he was just another being trying to survive in normal space. "This cannot be," he gasped, his voice now sounding fragile instead of terrible. "The strong survive. The weak perish. This is the way of the universe." Rick looked at the dying Admiral with something that surprised himself. Pity. "Maybe that's your problem. You only know how to take strength from others. Humans learned a long time ago that real strength comes from giving it away." The ship continued to phase fully back into normal space-time. Through the chamber's walls, Rick could see stars in their proper positions for the first time since they had entered the vessel. The void render was becoming just another ship, massive and dangerous but no longer a cosmic horror that existed beyond reality. The brain's consciousness reached out to the humans one final time. Rick felt its gratitude, its relief at being free from centuries of forced participation in genocide. But he also sensed something else. A final gift. Energy surrounded the three humans, not the dark, hungry energy they had felt before, but something warm and protective. The consciousness was using the last of its power to transport them to safety, away from the dying ship. "Thank you," Rick whispered as the transport field built around them. The last thing he saw as they materialized aboard their own ship was the void render's hull beginning to dissolve peacefully into quantum foam. The consciousness that had been tortured into powering a weapon of mass destruction had chosen to use its freedom to save the lives of those who had freed it. Throughout space, the Deathworld Alliance fleet watched in confusion as their ultimate weapon simply faded away, taking with it their dreams of galactic conquest. On worlds across their empire, Deathworlder forces found their exotic technology failing as the quantum resonance that had powered their impossible machines went silent. The Alliance had built their strength on the suffering of others. Without that suffering to feed on, they were just another collection of species struggling to survive in a universe that was bigger and stranger than they had ever imagined. But Rick Hansen and his crew had learned something even more important. Sometimes the greatest victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from showing them that there was a better way to be strong. Admiral Helen Brooks watched her tactical display as every human ship in the solar system moved toward Earth's moon. The void render had appeared at the edge of the system an hour ago, but something was clearly wrong with it. The massive weapon that had destroyed worlds was flickering in and out of normal space like a dying star. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from Colonel Hansen," her communications officer reported. Rick's voice came through clearly, though there was exhaustion in his tone. "Control, this is Hansen. The void render's quantum anchor has been destabilized. The ship is phasing back into normal space, but it's not going down without a fight." Helen felt a surge of hope mixed with pride. "Rick, what's your status?" "We're safe thanks to the ship's consciousness. It transported us back to the silent thunder before the quantum fields collapsed. But Admiral, you need to know something. The Deathworlder forces are dying along with their enhanced technology. This isn't just a military victory. Their entire way of life is falling apart. Through the command center's windows, Helen could see the void render hanging near Earth's moon like a wounded giant. The ship was still enormous, still dangerous, but it no longer hurt to look at directly. Reality around it had returned to normal physics. All ships, this is Admiral Brooks, she broadcast to the human fleet. The enemy vessel is vulnerable to conventional weapons. Attack pattern Delta. Protect Earth at all costs. Captain Jake Morrison led the charge in his upgraded Terran Wanderer, joined by hundreds of vessels ranging from military battleships to civilian cargo haulers armed with mining lasers. For the first time in the war against the Deathworld Alliance, humans and their enemies would fight on equal terms. Inside the dying void render, Admiral Crix Vorthak struggled to understand what had happened to his perfect weapon. The ship's bio-neural interfaces were going dark one by one. Crew members throughout the vessel were collapsing as their exotic biological enhancements failed in normal space. Status report, he demanded from his crystalline command throne. A surviving Skrell officer, its acid-proof shell now cracking without quantum reinforcement, brought him the devastating news. Sir, quantum field generators are offline throughout the ship. Life support systems are failing. The reality anchors that allowed us to exist between dimensions have been completely severed. Crix felt something he had never experienced before: helplessness. The Alliance had built their power on the belief that only the strongest deserved to survive, and strength was measured by one's ability to endure pain and inflict it on others. But the humans had shown them a different kind of strength, one that came from compassion and sacrifice. How? He asked, his voice no longer carrying the fury of volcanic planets. How did soft-worlders from a garden world defeat us? The answer came not from his officers, but from the ship's dying consciousness itself. In its final moments, the tortured brain that had powered the void render shared its understanding with the admiral who had commanded its suffering. Crix saw through the consciousness's memories what humans truly were. They came from a world that was gentle compared to the death worlds of the Alliance. But that gentleness hadn't made them weak. Instead, it had taught them to value life, to protect the innocent, to find strength in unity rather than domination. When faced with cosmic horror, other species felt paralyzing fear. But humans felt anger at injustice, determination to protect others, hope that things could be better. These emotions created quantum resonances that interfered with exotic matter systems because they represented something the Deathworld Alliance had never encountered: strength that grew from giving rather than taking. The human fleet reached attack range just as the void renders' weapon systems came back online for one final assault. The ship fired everything it had at the approaching vessels. But without its reality-warping capabilities, the attacks were just conventional energy beams and missile barrages. Jake Morrison's tactical officer, Lisa Grant, coordinated the fleet's defensive fire with deadly precision. All ships concentrate on the weapon nodes along the hull. Without quantum shielding, they're vulnerable to focused energy attacks. The battle was fierce but brief. The void render, for all its massive size and remaining firepower, was a creature designed to exist partially outside normal space. Forced back into reality, it fought like a deep-sea creature dragged to the surface. Powerful but ultimately out of its element, human ships swarmed around the dying vessel, their weapons carving through hull plating that no longer existed in multiple dimensions. The Deathworlder crew, dependent on exotic enhancements to survive, could only watch as their ultimate weapon was systematically dismantled. Admiral Crix Vorthak sent a final transmission to the Alliance fleet, scattered across the galaxy. His voice carried none of its former confidence. To all Deathworld forces, this is Admiral Crix. The humans have shown us something we never understood. True strength comes not from surviving suffering, but from choosing to remain compassionate despite it. We have been defeated not by superior weapons, but by superior spirit. The transmission cut off as the Void Render's command center lost power, but the dying ship had one final gift to give. The consciousness that had powered it for centuries used its last moments of coherent thought to download the complete database of Deathworld Alliance strongholds, fleet positions, and military capabilities to Earth's communication networks. Helen Brooks watched the data stream across her screens in amazement. Coordinates for every Alliance world, Defensive positions, supply lines, everything humanity would need to liberate the galaxy from Deathworlder oppression. My God, she whispered. It's giving us the keys to their entire empire. The void render began to glow with a gentle light, very different from the hungry darkness it had radiated before. The tortured consciousness at its heart was finally at peace, and it chose to dissolve peacefully into quantum foam rather than risk becoming a weapon again. Admiral Krix Vorthak, his crystalline form cracking without exotic energy to sustain it, was transported to safety along with the surviving members of his crew. It was an act of mercy they would never have shown to defeated enemies. But humans had always been strange that way. Throughout Deathworld Alliance territory, the news of the Void Render's defeat spread like wildfire. On worlds where conquered species had lived in terror for generations, people looked up at the stars and dared to hope for freedom. The Alliance's exotic technology was failing everywhere, as the quantum resonance network that had powered it went silent. Some Deathworld Alliance forces chose to fight to the bitter end, unable to accept that their philosophy of strength through suffering had been proven wrong. But others, seeing their enhanced abilities fade and their impossible weapons fail, began to understand what Admiral Krix had realized in his final moments. True strength didn't come from surviving the harshest conditions or inflicting the most pain. It came from choosing to protect others even when you were afraid, from showing compassion to enemies who had shown you none, from believing that the universe could be better than it was. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Terran Wanderer, watching as the last traces of the Void Render faded into starlight. Around him, the human fleet maintained formation, ready to begin the long work of liberating the galaxy from Deathworld Alliance control. Captain, Lisa Grant reported, "We're receiving surrender requests from Alliance forces throughout the system. They're requesting humanitarian aid for their failing life support systems." Jake smiled. It was such a human thing to do, to offer help to enemies who had tried to destroy them. But maybe that was exactly why humanity had won. In a universe that often seemed dark and cold, they had chosen to be a light. "Send medical ships to assist," he ordered. "And Lisa, open a channel to Admiral Brooks. Tell her that Earth's last stand just became the galaxy's first step toward a better future." As the human fleet began its work of rescue and revelation, none of them noticed the small quantum signature that drifted away from the battle site. It was barely detectable, just a whisper of consciousness that had learned something new about the nature of strength and mercy. The Void Render was gone, but what it had learned from humanity would ripple across the galaxy for generations to come.